Hope you enjoy watching this video.
Toronto Crew is first and foremost a network. We are a network of talented and connected business professionals, and our members represent every discipline in the commercial real estate industry.
Toronto Crew is part of Crew Network, a global network with over 12,000 members across 79 chapters in North America and the UK. Our network enables our members to connect globally, to exchange ideas, discuss business opportunities, and to build their leadership skills in an inclusive environment.
Our mission at Toronto Crew is to transform the commercial real estate industry by advancing women to positions of leadership and influence. And this year marks our 25th year of acting in this capacity.
Over our 25-year history, Toronto Crew has impacted thousands of women's careers. Crew started because a group of women decided to create a networking group. At that time, there weren't many women in commercial real estate, and forming Crew created a platform for connection, collaboration, and a sense of community.
And now, 25 years later, we are in a unique position and moment in history where women and allies can work together creatively to redefine the future of the industry through both innovation and inclusion. At Toronto Crew, we believe that we have an important role to play in moving the gender dial forward and in setting an example of inclusion and diversity for the entire commercial real estate industry.
Toronto Crew is at the forefront of inclusion efforts for the industry. It is intentional about promoting diversity in commercial real estate by ensuring that all our events and content represent diverse perspectives and provide opportunities for all our members to contribute in a meaningful way to our mission.
We recognize that to succeed in our mission, we need to encourage young women to pursue a career in commercial real estate.
Each year, Toronto Crew hosts Real Jobs Day, a one-day program designed to introduce grade 11 and grade 12 girls to the many career opportunities available to them in commercial real estate.
Toronto Crew also awards scholarships to female students enrolled in a post-secondary program specializing in real estate. Over our 25-year history, we've awarded over $265,000 of scholarships to young women.
As these young women enter the industry, we then support them through our mentorship program, where experienced members dedicate time to mentoring members that are at the beginning stages of their careers. Mentors impart industry knowledge and professional guidance to assist mentees with achieving their professional goals. With these initiatives, Toronto Crew hopes to build a pipeline and a roadmap for young women to succeed in the commercial real estate industry.
For our members, we offer many ways to engage through our various networking events and professional development opportunities, and we create an inclusive environment for our male allies to support us on our mission.
As an active member of Toronto Crew, I have attended events and participated in both the mentoring program and Connect 6. These have all provided genuine opportunities for me to connect with industry professionals, gain new perspectives, and learn how to be an ally to the women I work with in the industry.
We would like to thank our growing number of sponsors who have helped us in the important work of making our industry a more diverse and inclusive place. We could not deliver on our mission without your support.
While we celebrate our 25th anniversary year, we honor our past and look forward with renewed dedication to our mission of advancing women in commercial real estate by empowering each other for an inclusive future.
Hello, my name is Susan Bertez, and I'm the Regional Operations Manager at BGAS, responsible for the management and operations of Rogers Downtown Campus and head office on Bloor Street. 5 years ago, I had the honor to chair the committee that planned our 20th anniversary. It was a wonderful in-person red carpet gala with many details that at the time were an extraordinary accomplishment. We reflected on the past and celebrated our beginnings. When I was asked to return as the 25th anniversary chair, I was excited to plan what I envisioned to be an even grander event. I wanted to celebrate all the Toronto Crew had become and how we would take these accomplishments and move them towards a wonderful future. And then COVID impacted those red carpet plans. Struggling to change my vision for this in-person party, our committee proceeded with brainstorming to create an online event that would celebrate these milestones and engage those joining us to celebrate. I am so excited to see this new vision play out tonight. I want to thank the incredible members of the 25th Anniversary Committee, not only for everything they did to plan the details of this evening, but also for helping me rethink the celebration. They have done so much to plan this evening together, and I cannot say enough in appreciation. Thank you to my Vice Chair, Vera, for keeping us on track and organized with your super project managing skills. To Lois, Anga, and Samantha, who had the vision to put this online event together and will work this evening to transition us through the night. To Taylene and Michelle, who worked with Daniel and Daniel to put together the menu and the gifts you each received this evening. And to Margaret, who helped us secure Jennifer Keesmaat as our keynote speaker. And a special thanks to Kim and Farah and both Toronto Crew boards that supported us through these unprecedented times and supported our vision for this evening's celebration. The best part about being a Toronto Crew member are the opportunities to get to know the amazing people in this industry on a personal level. Tonight, we have incorporated 2 opportunities to do this. During dinner, following my toast, everyone will be put into breakout rooms hosted by Toronto Crew board and this committee. After 15 minutes, we will change out the breakout rooms and you'll have another 15 minutes with a new group. We will then come back together to carry on with the evening's events. At the end of the evening, I encourage everyone to join us for a networking on Wonder Me. Please put on your cameras and enjoy. With that said, I encourage you to pop the champagne, if you have not done so already, and raise your glasses in a toast to Toronto Crew's 25th anniversary and the next 25 years. As we reconnect in new ways, we have the unique opportunity to rethink the future we want. With proven resilience and a positive outlook, we will transform the way we live and work in a world that will be more flexible, innovative, and inclusive. Here's to each and every one of you here tonight who will continue to empower, mentor, and support each other today and every tomorrow thereafter. Cheers.
Cheers.
Okay, everyone, now you will be placed into your breakout rooms. At this point, it will take about a few minutes for you to show a name. And
so I hope everyone enjoyed dinner. I know I did. I heard some people already at theirs, so it means it was good. Yay. My name is Lois Aniting, and I am one of the 25th anniversary committee members, and I'm also a financial analyst at Crestpoint Real Estate Investments. And I have the pleasure tonight of introducing our keynote speaker, Jennifer Keesmaat, who is well known in the Toronto region. Jennifer Keesmaat is passionate about creating places where people flourish. She spent 5 years as Toronto Chief City Planner, where she was celebrated for her innovative and collaborative approach to city building and was named one of the most powerful people in Canada by Maclean's magazine and one of the most influential by Toronto Life. Currently, Jennifer is a founding partner of Marquee Development, where she, along with veteran developer Jason Marks, are developing new communities across the GTA as sustainable, livable places that prioritize access to high quality, affordable rental housing. She is also a distinguished visitor in Resident Emeritus at the University of Toronto and the chief architect of the 2020 Declaration for Resilience in Canadian Cities, which provides a blueprint for adapting cities post-pandemic. Jennifer is a graduate of the University of Western Ontario and has a master's in environmental studies from York University. Her innovative work has been repeatedly recognized by professional associations, including the Canadian Institute of Planners, York University, and the 2017 City Builders Award from EDIT, the Design Exchange. Jennifer will be speaking for 30 minutes and we'll have 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to drop them in the chat, or you can send them to our moderator, Farah Kimji, if you prefer to do so. So without further ado, please join me in giving a virtual applause as we welcome Jennifer Keesmaat.
Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be here this evening. I've been having so much fun. Can we just stay in the breakout rooms and eat and drink and chat? This has been really great. This is my first crew event. It will not be my last. I'm thrilled at the invitation to be here today. And one of the reasons I'm thrilled to be here today is because a couple of days ago, I was in an IB class at the business school at Western. And I was speaking to fourth year students on how you create value in cities and value creation. And it was one of the first times I was getting back in the room. And I walked into the room and I almost gasped. If I wasn't wearing a mask, people would have seen that it was audible, because there are 50 students in the class and there were 42 men and there were 7 women in the class. And I was honestly gobsmacked to see how underrepresented women were in this class, which is one of the few classes on commercial real estate at the Ivy Business School. We had a wonderful class and a wonderful conversation, and I spoke with some of the women at the end. But it's a strange thing for me, having been in this industry for 25 years, and seeing that I'm not sure how much progress we're making. And I don't say that as a way of despairing. I say it as a way of challenging. I think all of us are challenged. I am challenged to figure out how we continue to open the door and hold the door open for young women to see the incredible opportunity that they can have in being a part of building their communities and building their cities. So I want to take my hat off to all of you for being involved in CREW. I know that's a critical part of what you do, including around mentorship. And it just was reinforced for me earlier this week how incredibly essential this organization is. And my goodness, you know how to have a good time. That's a wonderful, wonderful thing. I'm going to talk about the opportunity of city building. I'm a city planner. My background is in urban planning, and I've been engaged in city building in a whole variety of different ways over the course of my career. And in part, what I'm hoping is that talking a little bit about the moment we find ourselves in, because we find ourselves in a very, very special moment in history. If we can talk a little bit about this moment that we find ourselves in, and then talk about where we could go, what could potentially happen, and then also how we could get there, I think there's an opportunity for us to really, in some ways, as women in this industry, stick out our elbows and be a part of the change that we know the world so desperately needs. So I'd like to begin by just talking a little bit about drivers for change. And if you can nod, if you can see my slides, because I can't tell, you can. Okay, good. That's the surreal thing of doing this on Zoom. A little bit about why we must plan, live, and engage differently post-COVID. And there's been much talk about how pre-COVID trends simply accelerated over the course of the past 2 years. And anyone who's watched the news over the past 24 hours in British Columbia knows that the shocks and the global crises that we see, particularly related to climate change, are beginning to accelerate. What looks like a doomsday scenario where you've got wildfires that take away the vegetation, and then you have torrential rains and nowhere for the rain to go because you have a scorched earth that then leads to mudslides, is a cycle that was long predicted, but that we've never seen, but we're seeing it now. We're seeing it right now in our lifetime. And it means that this is a moment in history where we need to pause and ask questions about what we do every day and whether we ought to be doing things in a fundamentally different way. I also want to suggest that we've known for a long time about some of the challenges that we face, but we've often taken incremental approaches to change. And I'm going to talk a lot about housing because that's the thing that I know best. So I'm going to talk a little bit about housing, and I'll talk about how we need to be much more dramatic in responding to the housing shortage and the housing crisis that we see. We also have struggled, I think, because some of the challenges that we face as a society are on such a big scale. Climate change, problems with the global economy, they're so big that it becomes really difficult to figure out what's my role in actually advancing change. And I think it's a good thing for us to struggle with that question. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of my story and how I've struggled with that question and how I'm responding to that question with the hope that it might be of some value or some use. I'll also say that we know the timeless principles of urbanism that are necessary to embrace, to define a sustainable future, to advance shared prosperity. But the truth is we've been ignoring them. I'm going to talk a little bit about land use planning. It sounds boring, but it's actually at the foundation of fixing things like landslides and wildfires. The challenge is we haven't been doing a lot of the things that we know we ought to do. Canada is a perfect example. Over the past decade, the vast majority of our new development has been suburban sprawl, auto-oriented suburban sprawl. So we talk a lot about investing in transit, the importance of transit, adding density and creating walkable communities. But a lot of that is talk. What we're actually doing, the way we're using our land, the way we're building housing is very, very different. So we sort of have to reckon with what we know and what we need to do and what we're actually doing. We also know that planning for social connectedness and belonging will mitigate disaster for vulnerable populations and reduce vulnerability in our cities. There's a tremendous amount of data. When a crisis strikes, if people know their neighbors, they are much more likely to have the resources to survive that struggle. So the way we design our cities to ensure we actually know our neighbors and that we're part of the fabric of a place is a really critical part of addressing number one, what I'm showing here, which is that these shocks are going to continue to accelerate. So to lay a bit of the groundwork, I'd like to talk about some of the foundations of urbanism. This is that fourth thing I talked about. Some of the things we know we should be doing, but that we haven't been doing, that we have an opportunity to embrace. And one of the first ones is that housing must be a first priority. If we're not providing housing for everyone, we're going to have people living in tents. It's that simple. I never thought in my lifetime I would see people living in tents in the city of Toronto, but that is happening today. I have not met a single Torontonian who is okay with that. So we need to put our shoulder to the wheel and fix the problem. And I just want to paint a little bit of the portrait. The other foundations I'm going to go through, I'll go through a bit more quickly, but I want to spend a little bit of time on this one because it really is a foundational challenge that we need to fix, which is access to housing. And anyone who has a child or who has a niece or a nephew who lives in this city has probably had this conversation. Because my daughter is 21, she's in 4th year at Western in political science. And when she was about 13 was the first time she said to me, you know, Mom, I'm not sure I'm going to live in Toronto. And I said, Alex, that's crazy. You love Toronto. Why wouldn't you live here? And she said, well, I don't think I could ever afford a house here. This is a 13-year-old kid. Like, that's crazy. That is a reflection of a fundamental break in our city building, a problem in our city building, that an entire generation is seeing themselves as being locked out. So let's take a little bit of a look at the data and see how we got here, because it points to the solution. So Scotiabank earlier this year came out with a really powerful report with a tremendous amount of data identifying that solving our housing crisis should be a national priority, and also that we have an insufficiency of new housing on any supply horizon. So this isn't a COVID problem. This is a problem that is deeply ingrained in how we have been building our cities. And let's take a little bit of a closer look at that. Part of the affordability challenge is that we just have a mismatch between population growth and the supply of new units that are on the market. So if you take a look at the image here, take a look at what happens in 2015. So you see on the blue bar, the increase in the supply of rental housing. And then you see on the red part of the graph, the increase in the population. So we shouldn't be surprised. It's actually, in some ways, you could argue by design. We are simply not building enough housing to house the population. And we've been talking a lot about how sustaining growth in our country is linked to increasing immigration. Well, I would argue that we're going to get all kinds of wonky outcomes if we increase immigration, but we don't address this backlog in supply and add significantly more housing supply. You're going to start seeing people saying, hey, we don't want immigration. We don't want to see economic growth because we don't have housing to sustain it. Taking a little bit of a closer look at this, at the core of the affordability crisis rests the fact that the cost of housing shortage of supply, has risen much faster than the average household incomes. So if you look here at a variety of different indicators where you can look at the growth beyond inflation, well, we all know a really good one to hone in on immediately is a little bit, see if my mouse works here, undergraduate tuition is up 35%, but income's up 4%. Housing is up 94%. So to paint a little bit of a clearer picture on this, I was born in 1970. In that year, my parents bought their first home. Their home was 2 times my dad's salary. Their home cost $46,000 to buy. My dad's salary was $23,000. He was 23 years old. Today, the average house is 12 times the average salary. And that just kind of puts a really fine point on what's happened in one generation. So our kids aren't crazy in thinking that, like, how do I even possibly enter into this market? Something that was entirely viable just a generation ago has become completely beyond reach in this generation. Now, if we look on the housing continuum, because that graphic was from rental housing, we've really focused on the yellow bar right on the end here on market home ownership. I would argue that homelessness, emergency shelters, seeing people living in the park, that's an outcome of a broken housing spectrum. When people can't make the stretch to home ownership, remember 12 times the average salary, they look to market rental. But remember, we just saw that we have a huge shortage of market rental housing. Then people start looking for affordable rental. But if there's no affordable rental, again, a massive supply gap, they go on the list for social housing. And people just kind of get bumped down that spectrum. So you have a situation where working people cannot afford to access housing in our city. So this is a really critical thing that we need to solve if we want livable, viable cities moving forward. The second key foundation of urbanism is that we need nature. I think the great thing about COVID is that we realize this in a really profound way, that a critical part of mental health is connected to access to nature. Urbanism needs nature. I created the Ravine strategy as a chief planner in the city of Toronto because I saw protecting green space and enhancing green space as being conjoined with the social license to create dense places. If we only create dense places, but we don't add nature, we don't protect nature, we don't create places for reprieve from urban intensity, then we get really wonky outcomes. So foundational to our city building has to be integrating nature. Now, food production is a really critical foundation as well. And I think what's happening in British Columbia, what we're going to see over the next couple of weeks, because the lower mainland has just been severed from the rest of the country. So think about this in terms of the supply chain. It's actually almost impossible to comprehend. You have food supply coming in from Asia, but you also have oil from Alberta going out through the Vancouver port. This notion that we need to make the production of things that we rely on to survive more local is about resilience when those global shocks happen. So there's no reason why we can't reboot local food production, which is also about creating a circular economy where we're taking waste, putting that waste back into the soil, fertilizing the soil, producing food, instead of putting waste in a truck, in an 18-wheeler and hauling it off to Michigan, which is just wrong on so many levels. Local food production is about viability of our cities when we face those shocks, but it's also about mitigating future changes to our climate. Another critical foundation is mobility options. During COVID, we also saw a real shift in how we move about. Public transit use went way, way down, and we saw cycling go way, way up. We saw a moment where we were able to add a significant amount of cycling infrastructure. But the way we plan land determines whether those mobility choices are going to be viable. In the vast majority of the country, it's ridiculous to think that people are going to get around on a bike, because it's not how we've planned our cities and we've planned our land. And I'll talk about this image a little bit more a little bit later. This is our first development in my new company, Tyndale Green, but you'll notice that the buildings don't face roads. The buildings actually face shared streets where the focus is on pedestrianism and cycling and creating a walkable community. There's an opportunity, if we get our land use planning right and our densities right, to make walking and cycling a real choice. And I think the good news about COVID is that being in our neighborhood so much, a lot of people started to go, oh, wait a minute, there's a lot of things I can do in my neighborhood. A lot of people discovered what they can't do in their neighborhood because their neighborhoods are deficient. And so this opportunity to think, what can I do closer to home, on foot, getting your hair cut, going to the dentist, all those good things, that is an outcome of land use planning. It's not just about putting a bike lane in place. So we've really got to fix the way we plan land. Foundation number 6 is the best places are designed for all stages of life. I think given what we've gone through over the past 2 years, not too many of us are looking forward to being shipped off to an old age home. Doesn't sound so pleasant. One of the reasons people end up in long-term care facilities is because they can no longer drive and they live in communities where they're required to drive. So creating walkable communities is connected to creating communities where we can have home care, where we can be part of our neighborhoods for a longer period of time. There's also a wonderful interrelationship between facilities that are for young people and facilities that are for elderly people. If we design our neighborhoods this way, if we design those kinds of shared spaces, this is a foundation of creating livable, sustainable cities. And the last foundation I'd like to talk about is that empathy grows through interactions and shared experiences. And the risk in our cities, and I'll break this down in more detail in a minute, but the risk in our cities is that we create exclusive enclaves. The opportunity is that we can build understanding through shared experiences, just like Crew is doing amongst women who are commercial real estate professionals. We can do that more broadly in our city. We can break down some of the ignorance that divides us when we create spaces where we share resources, where we take care of one another, and a lot of that has to do with how we design our cities. And I just put this image on the screen because I was showing a lot of pictures from other places in the world, and I just wanted to say, like, this is not a perfect example of what I'm talking about, but it starts to get us there. When we changed this street from being a highway, this is Queens Quay, it had 3 lanes in each direction. We changed it to 2 lanes, 1 lane in each direction, made the streetcar right-of-way dedicated, and put in a wide cycle track and a wide sidewalk. We actually saw the efficiency of the corridor completely transform. So some of the ideas I'm talking about here are not actually radical. Some of them we've done, but we've just done them in little tiny incremental ways, and the opportunities to really do them at scale. And in part because, you know, the future can be pretty grand. We can imagine growing old in this community or raising your children in a neighborhood where you never worry about them getting hit by a car. I live in Midtown Toronto. My great fear to this day is that one of my kids is going to get hit by a car. I'm terrified of this. I think this is a real serious issue when you've designed your city around cars. There's a future where we are having a positive impact on the environment, where our food is local, where our children are safer, and our elderly people can be a part of a community as they grow old. And you know what? It's not that hard for us to get there. We just need a little bit of political will and a little bit of passion and belief that we can actually do this. Really, at the heart of what I'm saying here is that the places that we design and build, that they either contribute to the flourishing of our societies and our long-term sustainability, or they detract. And it's sort of an either or. This, you know, I said one of the issues that we've struggled with is incrementalism. We say, well, we'll take a balanced approach. We'll make our suburbs denser. I actually think we've really messed up a lot of our suburbs because we've made them denser, which means there's more cars, but we haven't added mobility options. So now they're really challenging places to live and get around because cars take up a lot of space, like the physics don't work. The in-between point hasn't worked very well, and we have an incredible opportunity to fix that. One of the ways that we can fix that is by moving towards creating 15-minute neighborhoods. And this is what I'm doing in my company, Marquee Developments. And I'll show you that example of our first project in a minute. But just to put the comparison on the table for you. So the old model is tall and suburban sprawl. We build a really tall, intense downtown, and then it is surrounded by sprawl. And you really have two monocultures. You have one type of housing, and you have one type of use in the downtown core, which is primarily office. It's inherently exclusive in a carbon intensive model. The new model is a diversity of housing types and tenures, and it's inherently inclusive. It's mixed use development where we can walk to work because we've integrated housing with our office and with our retail sectors. The old model is designed for driving. The new model is designed for walking and cycling as a first choice. Doesn't mean you're always going to walk and cycle, but you can at least do some things within walking distance of home. There's not a lot that you can do within walking distance of home in this first image, even if there's a sidewalk. The sidewalk has nothing to do with it. The problem is the distances are too far to get to a neighborhood cafe. In the new model, where you trade off a little bit of your private space for better shared public space in the 15-minute neighborhood model. And for those who haven't been following this movement, the 15-minute neighborhood is language that has come to embody what in the Toronto context and the Canadian context we've really talked about as complete communities. Communities where you can do a whole variety of things within walking distance of home. It's become popularized during COVID because the mayor of Paris has taken this model and is transforming Paris on a 15-minute neighborhood model. And the 15-minute neighborhood, it actually looks a lot like that image, meaning there's food production within homes. There's a diversity of housing types. There's a mix of rental and a mix of ownership. There's office spaces and retail spaces that are all mixed into the fabric of the neighborhood. The tall and sprawl model, we often try to overlay transit into these places, and it just doesn't work very well because the bus comes every 45 minutes. There's not enough density. It's inherently contradictory to transit. In the 15-minute neighborhood model, we have sufficient densities. So we don't have to have towers. We can do mid-rise development, or we can have towers. There's a lot of different ways to deploy density, but there's enough density that you can enable high frequency transit, that there can be, like the subway in Toronto, you never look at a schedule. You just know that when you go, it's going to arrive. That's how our bus services should work as well. In the old model, the priority is private luxury. Everyone's going to have their own yard and their own pool. In the 15-minute neighborhood model, the priority is the public spaces and public luxury is prioritized. In the old model, food is imported and waste is exported. In the 15-minute neighborhood model, food production is local and waste is regenerated back into the neighborhood. In the old model, there's high public infrastructure subsidy on a per capita basis. So suburban communities, there's a whole movement called City Making Math, which shows that low density suburban sprawl has a very, very high municipal subsidy for service provision. The higher a density goes, the lower the cost of the service provision, whether it be roads, water, access to library, access to parks. So in the new model, the 15-minute neighborhood model, there's a higher quality public infrastructure, but it's actually provided at a lower cost. It's provided at a lower cost because you have more people using that infrastructure because it's a higher density neighborhood. Regent Park is a really, really good example of that. So let me shift gears a little bit and tell you about how since I've left the City of Toronto, I asked the question, knowing that regulators, being the chief planner, regulators can't deliver more housing. All they do is enable housing. There needs to be someone on the other side who's going to build it. And so when I left the City of Toronto, I was introduced to someone who very quickly became my partner. His name's Jason Marks. He has a background in real estate. He's a former TD of lending, former VP of lending at TD Bank. He's an engineer and a finance guy. And I say all of that only because he understands and delivers on a part of the company that is not my expertise, because my expertise is in the land acquisition and the land use planning and the entitlements process side. We created a company called Marquee Developments that is focused on building very high quality, beautiful, affordable urban rental homes. Now, when I say affordable, I'm talking about middle income earners. So one of the things that's happened is that we've had a break between the average wage and the average cost of housing. And so our affordable model is targeted to be 20% below market rents. And the objective of doing that is to bring in line the average rent with the average salary. So people who will live in our housing will be teachers and web designers and people running startups. They're the target middle income earners for Marquee Developments. And our goal is to take the best of private sector practices and expertise to deliver on a public good through the design, building, and operating of exceptional housing. And you can see here the elements of our approach. So I've talked a little bit about the affordable piece. We're focused on rental, but we imagine at some point in the future, we'll be delivering rent to own as part of our model so that people can build equity. And we also put a really high emphasis on sustainability for a very simple reason. It's not about ESG goals. It's because it's crazy at this moment in history not to be building a product that is going to have longevity over the next 100 or 200 years. So this is our first development, Tyndale Green. We have 4 developments underway right now. We have over 2,000 units in the pipeline. This development is 15 buildings, and it is a landscape of mid-rise buildings that has been designed to create a new community hub. It's just off Bayview Avenue. So we have a daycare, a community center, and a cafe as the heart of the community. The goal being to increase the number of things that you can do within walking distance of home. The buildings range from 5 stories, mostly they're between 5 and 8 stories, and then there's a couple of taller buildings as well. It's 15 buildings in total, and 50% of the homes in this community are targeted to middle income earners. The affordable homes will be mixed throughout the entire development with the market homes. We essentially are taking these foundations of urbanism principles, and we've asked the question, what would that look like if we did it? And we found a land partner who was interested in delivering on this vision, and that's what we're doing on all of our sites now. Here's another image. The site has an existing university, Tyndale University. We're restoring and investing in the heritage buildings as part of the development because they're a critical part of the overall placemaking of the site. But the emphasis is on creating places where people can thrive. And I have to say, when I talked a bit about this at Ivy a couple of days ago, one of these business students shot his arm into the air and said, I have a question. I said, yes, what's your question? How do you get on the list to live there? And I have to tell you, it was really interesting to hear that. And it reflects the panic, I think, that exists in a generation that's worrying already today about where they're going to live. So I'm just going to end with a couple of slides on the model that I have used in my planning practice for advancing transformative change, for essentially looking at the world through this lens of what kind of a role can I play in being an actor and being a part of some of the biggest challenges that we see today. And the approach, the methodology that I've created to this, we've kind of given it a name. We call it Within Reach because it's the idea that all of us have things that we can do that is within reach. New technology isn't required. We don't need new skills. We can use the skills that we have today. And it really begins with asking this question. First of all, what are the drivers for change? When I look at my sphere of influence, I look at the things that I do. What are the things that need to change in my industry, in the seat that I sit in every day? And then asking the question, what's the vision? What is it do I want to accomplish? How do I want to be a part of the solution? What is it that I'm passionate about? And then there's some critical questions that it's really important to understand. What are the barriers to me doing this? who are my natural allies, and what is my sphere of influence? And in the ideal scenario, all of us should be bumping up against our sphere of influence, right? Identifying what can I realistically do, and then pushing those boundaries. And the minute you push on those boundaries, you're going to begin to see your sphere of influence expand, and your sphere of influence is going to change, and that will be a good thing. And then once you've kind of worked through those first three questions, the why, the vision, and the context, then it's a matter of creating a plan of action. And I used this approach in developing the plan for the King Street pilot, for those who are from Toronto, which really is very interesting because we had this incredible problem. So the driver for change was that the streetcars moved slower than walking on King Street. So one of the busiest transit corridors in Canada, but when you got on the streetcar, people walked by you. And so we collected data, and in collecting data, we discovered that even though cars only moved 16% of the people in the corridor, only 16% of the passengers in the corridor were being moved by cars. Most of the people were being moved on transit. Cars took up 64% of the space. So once we had that data, we then created a plan for turning the corridor into an efficient corridor by making it a transit priority corridor. And you can see here, if you just kind of scroll through a little bit, you'll see, we asked the question, what are the barriers to success? Then who are my natural allies? The natural allies on the King Street pilot became a really critical part of being able to drive it forward. In part because when you look at the barriers to success, we knew that there was a city council that wasn't so keen. And then we asked the question, what is my sphere of influence? And what's interesting is that I wasn't responsible for transit operations, but I was responsible for transit planning. And so we used that to create a vision and a plan around a transit corridor that was highly efficient. And the metrics on what we achieved on that corridor are absolutely outstanding. We spent several $1 million and created more transit capacity than the Shepherd subway. Not to pick on the Shepherd subway, but we added more capacity than a multi-billion-dollar project using a couple $1 million and changing the policy framework. And of course, we saw commute times go down from being an average of 45 minutes to an average of 23 minutes as a result of that transformation. And we also saw an influx of new riders to the corridor precisely because it was so efficient. So that's kind of another really tangible example of how this framework can actually deliver on change. And I'll just say in closing that we have an opportunity and we have a window at this moment in history to advance transformative change. We've actually seen that in our cities over the course of the past 2 years as a result of the pandemic. But the drivers needing to create more inclusive cities, needing to ensure that we're creating cities where people have the resilience that they need as climate shocks continue to shake up the way we live, those drivers are not going away. In fact, they're only becoming more magnified. And I'm just so thrilled that I've had this opportunity to talk to you today, because I firmly believe that there are a team of people at Crew who are deeply passionate about changing the world around them, and the world needs you. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that very informative and inspiring address. Hi, everyone. I am Farah Kimji, the founder and CEO of Futura Funds, and I work directly with tech companies and corporate clients on their technology adoption and innovation plans. I also serve on the board of Toronto Crew as the past president. So now we are going to field questions from the audience. If you haven't done so already, you can pop them in the chat, but I do actually have quite a few. So I'm going to get through as many as we can. I think we can go right up until 7:20. So first question that we have that came in. All right. Do you think that the provincial government will promote through zoning that industrial construction also incorporate greenhouse agricultural spaces or solar farms on rooftops?
So if the question is whether or not that's something that's imminent, I don't think that's something that's imminent. I think it is something that will happen in the fullness of time, but I don't think that's a priority of this government. One of the things I will just highlight is that at the municipal level, when we introduced the green roof bylaw, there was a tremendous amount of pushback from industry and concern that building this type of green infrastructure would compromise the viability of new development in the city. And the irony is that was just over 10 years ago. And I think it's safe to say that the city is continuing to grow gangbusters. So the innovations around green technologies and better using urban spaces to deliver food, to capture solar energy, I believe we're just on the cusp of seeing what is possible. So it's a really exciting area, I think, to watch.
Okay, amazing. Thank you. Next question here. You need to incentivize developers. You need to incentivize developers to build this type of housing. How? Tall and sprawl gets you bigger density and bigger profits as opposed to sufficient density and sufficient profits. We need to get the folks building the housing and communities incentivized to make these idyllic communities happen. So I guess the question is, how do we do that? How do we incentivize everyone?
Yeah, great question. And you do need to incentivize it. And so our model works because of incentives that exist at the City of Toronto. And it's important to differentiate between incentives and subsidy. There's no long-term subsidy, but there are incentives because the city is looking for this kind of intensification. So there's absolutely a role for government to play in providing incentives in that transformation. But I'll also say that one of the reasons why it is profitable to build tall and sprawl is because that's what we are currently incentivizing. So if we had full cost accounting for suburban infrastructure, which we do not today, and in particular, the long-term operation of that infrastructure, no one would build it because the model isn't viable. So we've actually got wonky incentives right now. And I highly recommend a book by Pamela Blay, who's a Toronto land economist. She's written an excellent book called Perverse Cities, where she talks through the ways in which we say we want sustainable cities, but then we incentivize through our financial policy at municipalities something very different.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Next question, can the 15-minute model be applied to existing neighborhoods? And what about one-off buildings, i.e. new infill condo buildings in Toronto?
So absolutely, the answer is absolutely. And in fact, I would argue that the whole idea behind the 15-minute neighborhood is about infill. It's not about trying to build some kind of new urbanist utopia on the periphery. The opportunity really is to be transforming existing neighborhoods where we don't yet have sufficient density by incrementally adding more density and adding that density in a way that we're adding new housing types. So let's say we have a neighborhood that's only single family homes. You can imagine on corner lots, we start building up 5-story buildings that offer lofts or that offer a series of bachelor apartments so that there's a different typology in each neighborhood. It's about getting away from that monoculture, which is incredibly problematic for a whole variety of reasons. The 15-minute neighborhood is a problematic idea if we think about it in terms of being for greenfield development, because the 15-minute neighborhood actually relies on density and existing infrastructure, including an existing transit network. The problem we have today is we have urban schools that are not at capacity. We should be adding more density into those neighborhoods because we've already got the schools, we've already got the parks, we've already got the transit. So it's all about transforming existing places. And the project that I showed you, our Tyndale Green project, that is right smack dab in the middle of an existing very suburban neighborhood.
Yeah, okay. Within the real estate world, making profit is critical and expected from investors. Yet, with the increase in construction costs and high price of land, how can developers provide the required affordable housing stock?
Well, I think this question relates to the earlier question because I do think there's a role for government to play here. Government needs to play a role by providing incentives. Some of those incentives exist today. You might be familiar with the Rental Construction Incentive Financing Program that's offered by CMHC, which offers construction loans for a 10-year period, interest-free. That's actually a really good example of a government program that can tip the viability of a project that might not be viable to a project that will be viable. So I think, you know, we do have a really challenging environment with construction costs and soaring land costs. And this is where governments can actually calibrate those things through their public policies. And they always have. They always have. They need to continue to play that role.
Okay. And this may be a bit of a follow-on, but with a little bit of a different take. So what are your thoughts about Options for Home? It's a non-profit condo developer that makes home ownership more affordable. In this model, prospective homeowners can put 5% down, get up to 15% in down payment support. So what are your thoughts on that?
So I think there's a lot of really interesting models, Options for Homes being one of them. There's you know, a company that was just launched very recently called Keys to Concept, where people can get a very fractional part of the ownership of their rental as a way to begin building equity. I honestly believe that we need a whole series of innovations in the Canadian context. Community land trusts are a really good way to reduce the cost of housing by taking the value of the land out of the equation of how much housing costs. Very similar to what exists in Amsterdam, where almost all the land is owned by the municipality. So people pay a very modest rent for their land to the municipality. And that's the way the government has been able to keep land costs down. And, you know, Amsterdam looks downright cheap compared to Toronto right now, shockingly, if you ask me. So I think, you know, Options for Home is an example. There's lots of other examples. I think that the risk, of course, is that we do need a significant amount of rental housing specifically. We have a gap in rental housing, and for a whole variety of reasons, there are some people who do not want to own and won't own, and we need to be ensuring that we're increasing the rental supply. My position is we need a myriad of solutions. Right now, we have this many solutions. We need this many solutions. And I'm hoping that we're going to enter a phase in our city building over the next decade where you start seeing all kinds of innovative new models coming into play to ensure everyone has access to housing.
Okay, and this question actually is a good follow-up to that. So do you believe legislated quotas are required for developers to increase affordable rental housing provision up to 20% or more to increase supply?
So some of you may be aware that the City of Toronto just last week passed inclusionary zoning, which is essentially that in key areas of the city, particularly in proximity to rapid transit stations. You are now required to provide anywhere between 5 and 10% affordable housing. To a certain extent, we've actually been doing this in the City of Toronto over the course of the past 10 years through our negotiated Section 37s, where we often ask for a component of affordable housing. We've done it in way too tiny of an increment. I think the challenge is we have a negotiated approvals process where we determine what's going to happen on any given site through a process with the city. And I would argue that that needs to include a negotiated process around affordable housing. I know from the work that we've done, there are some sites in the city where when you take the land costs and you take the construction costs, if you layer in a requirement from the city on affordable housing, you actually break the pro forma and it's no longer viable. So I think it's a very tricky area, but which is why I prefer incentives rather than putting blanket requirements in place. I think governments should put more incentives in place and saying, look, if on your site you can achieve X level of affordability, we will forgive development charges or we will forgive planning fees, or those kinds of incentives, I think are a much more powerful approach. They're the carrot approach versus the stick approach. You know, the risk, of course, with putting a blanket requirement in place is that it actually contributes to the problem and slows down the amount of supply that we see in the city, because people look at their site and go, oh, well, if I have to build 20% affordable, I can't build anything at all because the pro forma no longer works. And if that happens, well, then we're really shooting ourselves in the foot because we need more housing overall in every part of the housing spectrum.
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned, COVID and some of the good things that have come out of that, green space being one of the things you mentioned. What else would you say are some of the good, positive outcomes that we're starting to see from COVID on city planning?
Well,
Crew board. I would like to thank you very much for sharing your evening with us and inspiring our members by the example you have set for being an engaged leader in our city who is constantly pushing the status quo. We hope you enjoy the rest of the evening with us, which will include some cocktail entertainment and networking. But before we get to that, I'm going to pass it over to Karen Sweet to kick off the announcement of our 2021 Leadership Awards. Over to you, Karen.
Hi, Farah. Thank you so much. Jennifer, thank you so much for all of that. I actually had to take my headphones off so that the other people in my house could listen to you as well. So hope that's okay, Farah. I'll pay the extra admission fees later. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Karen Sweet. I'm a Managing Director and Canadian Commercial Real Estate Practice Lead at Accenture. And I'm proud to be here as Toronto Crew's President-elect to honor our award recipients for their contributions to Toronto Crew. So on an annual basis, Toronto Crew honors members of our chapter who consistently deliver excellence and whose accomplishments and contributions show support for our organization's mission to transform the commercial real estate industry by advancing women to positions of leadership and influence. Inductees must demonstrate excellence, integrity, and innovation and serve as thought leaders, change agents, and champions of diversity. And now we would like to announce the winners of the 2021 Toronto Crew Leadership Awards. The first award is the Rising Star Award. This award is presented to a Toronto Crew member who has worked in the commercial real estate industry for less than 10 years and whose initiative in the industry stands out. I am so happy to announce that this year's winner of the Rising Star Award is Lois Anaidi. Lois is a financial analyst at Crestpoint, and in her short time as a Toronto Crew member has already made a significant impact as a valuable contributor and leader. She's a former Crew Scholarship winner and has participated as a member of multiple committees, including the Marketing and Communications Committee and the 25th Anniversary Committee, who organized the event tonight. And Lois is currently Vice Chair for Marketing and Communications. Lois is committed to learning and developing herself. During her career, she has continued to seek opportunities for education and involvement with Crew, NAOP, ULI, as well as a variety of certifications and learning experiences. She is also a passionate advocate for women and children. In addition to her involvement with Crew, she is deeply interested in financial literacy development for youth and women's initiatives. Lois is certainly a member to watch. So thank you, Lois, for your contributions. We look forward to seeing you lead and progress with Toronto Crew. And now back to you, Farah, to present our next award.
Thanks, Karen. The next award, the Engagement Volunteer Award, is presented to a Toronto Crew member who has shown intense dedication to committees and Toronto Crew activities for at least 1 year, and who through such commitments to members was able to promote the advancement of women in commercial real estate. This year's award goes to Alina Iordash. Alina's dedication and commitment to Toronto Crew has been incredible to witness. She served as the chair of the Marketing and Communications Committee from 2019 to 2021, a demanding leadership position during a very challenging time. Alina rose to the challenge and went above and beyond her responsibilities by contributing to several additional projects, such as the creation of a revised sponsorship package, virtual event guidelines, and also actively participated in the initiatives around creating a best practice resource guide to support the leaders in our organization. Alina also took the initiative to connect with other Canadian chapters in order to collaborate, share resources, and cross-promote events. This year, Alina also served as our delegate to Crew Network, attending all of the summits and the convention this year and reporting back to our leadership team on this front. What's most admirable about all that Alina has accomplished and all that she has done to support Toronto Crew is her tremendous level of commitment and dedication to see each and every task she took on through to a highly successful completion. Alina, Toronto Crew is very appreciative of all that you have done and continue to do to further Toronto Crew's mission by truly embodying it as an exemplary leader in our organization. Thank you. And I will now pass it over to Kim to present the final award.
Thanks, Laura. Our final award of the evening is our Tribute Award. This award is not based on nominations, but is determined by the Board of Directors. The Tribute Award is presented to a member of Toronto Crew whose contributions and commitment to Toronto Crew stand out above and beyond and exemplifies our Toronto Crew mission to transform the commercial real estate industry by advancing women to positions of leadership and influence. This year's award goes to Sharon Addison. And there she is. Sharon has been a highly engaged Toronto Crew and Crew Network member. Throughout her 14 years with Toronto Crew, she has held the position of Toronto Crew President in 2016, Toronto Crew Secretary, been the Toronto Crew Delegate, and the Crew Network Foundation Leadership Champion Director, and continues to participate on multiple committees. Sharon provides guidance and insight to the board through the Past Presidents Committee and Nominating Committee. She is passionate about the advancement of women in our industry and lives our vision every day as a person who is not only in a position of influence, but also directly supports members at every opportunity. And I personally would like to thank you, Sharon, for all that you do and hope that you continue to do for Toronto Crew. The board and chapter would like to congratulate all winners. Thank you all for all that you do for Crew. Your example inspires all of us. Keep shining bright. Over to Vera.
All right, here comes the fun. Everyone, Vera Gizaroff, Project Director at Interior Architects. I am co-chair of this 25th anniversary committee. So I get the pleasure of introducing the cocktail entertainment this evening. So you've all got lots of goodies in your bags, the wine coolers and some lovely gin. So this evening we're going to have the pleasure of Calvin Reid, who you can see him in there getting ready with his, in his distillery. He's going to be walking us through some holiday cocktails using their famous gin from Reid's Distillery. If you've never been to Reid's, it's a family-owned distillery right downtown in the Studio District. I highly recommend it. I mean, I think they've even converted me, who was not a gin drinker. And they use Canadian-based ingredients, which is also obviously really important these days. So make sure you stick around for the cocktail session, and don't forget we have some more networking after you've had a few more of these. So I'll hand it over to Graham to work his magic with gin.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me a part of your evening. Like you mentioned, my name is Calvin Reid. I'm one of the owners here at Reid's Distillery, and I'm actually the distiller as well. And so in your kits, you guys would have received some fun stuff that we can put together, and I'm going to guide you guys through sort of building a drink, and while doing it, also turning it into a bit of a gin tasting session. So what you guys would have received would have been a little miniature bottle of our Reid signature gin, this little blue guy here. That's going to be a traditional London dry style gin, really a well-balanced gin. And we've got a bottle of the Fentimans Connoisseurs tonic that we're going to pair with that one, just to see how those sort of play together. And then we get a gin that's a little bit more of a curveball, but it is this little spiced gin. And for those of you who don't like spicy things, please don't worry. It's not going to be too hot. The botanicals are really more warming botanicals. So the big three in that one are going to be cardamom, clove, cinnamon, that sort of flavor profile. And with that one, we're actually going to pair it to our Valencian orange tonic water. And so we'll see how the tonics actually pair to the gins themselves, and we will get a chance to try the gin on its own as well. So how we're going to kind of do this is we're going to build ourselves a drink, and we're going to try it at a few different stages, and in that way get a sense of what the spirit brings on its own, how it can be changed even with something like a little bit of ice or the addition of a tonic. So we're going going to start off with this classic pairing, which is going to be this little signature gin, a little blue guy, and our Fentiman's Connoisseur's Tonic. So we're going to pair these guys up. I will mention off the bat, if any of these steps don't sound super enjoyable to you, maybe you're not a huge gin fan, and the idea of drinking warm gin sounds like your nightmare, absolutely skip over that step and maybe just skip to the end when we absolutely put in the tonic and stuff as well. The point is that this is meant to be enjoyed, so please don't do anything that you know that you're not going to like just for my benefit. But for those of you who are eager to learn, let's dive right on in. So this little bottle here is going to be 50 mils of gin, which is close to a double. So however much you would like to enjoy this evening, I think probably one or two of these will probably make the networking that much easier. Maybe a little bit more difficult to remember, but certainly get the juices flowing. So maybe you just want to start with half. I always say you measure that with your heart. So whatever you guys are in the mood for. We also have the added benefit that everyone is at home now, so I don't need to worry about people getting home safe and sound. As long as you guys are okay to go up the stairs at the end of the night, I think we should be okay. So we will jump on and gonna crack this guy open here. And I'm just going to pour the gin as is right into my glass. And so going to be doing kind of a tasting here where the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to smell the botanicals. Essentially, in order for us to make gin, we make a high percentage vodka on these stills right behind me here. And then we're going to take that alcohol and redistill it again with all of these different botanicals. And botanicals can be anything. It can be seeds, peels, barks, berries, flowers, whatever you want to kind of infuse that flavor into your gin. And so gin is incredibly creative because, a similar idea of with the right ingredients, you can make a recipe and cook something that tastes like anything. With the right ingredients and the right botanicals, you can make gins that really taste like anything. So you get a little bit creative. So we've poured the gin in here, and the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to nose this a little bit. No need to shove your nose all the way right in. Deep inhale. It is a slight overproof gin, so you will be met with that ethanol blast, but just right off the top a little bit. Just going to do a little bit of a sniff, and usually we get some of those higher flavors coming to the top. So for me, it's those two citrus botanicals that we have in this gin. The two citrus botanicals that we use in this guy are actually going to be, it's grapefruit peel and it's lime peel. We peel it fresh here ourselves when we make it, and we played around with a bunch of different botanicals in the citrus world, but we actually found that the combination of the grapefruit and the lime together really played very nicely. The grapefruit's a little bit more of a soft, bittersweet, and the lime being a little bit more of a sharp, tart bitterness. And so having them kind of like play off each other is really, really fun. So we can get some of those higher notes right off the top. And at this point, I'm going to try the gin. I'm going to do pretty much enough to just sort of wet my tongue. No need to shoot it all back. It makes for a very short gin tasting. So we will just sort of do enough to really get a sense of what the spirit is bringing to the table on its own. So we'll do a little bit of a sip of that. And again, we get some of those higher notes. We get the citrus coming in, but when it's sitting on our tongue, we get some more depth of flavor in there as well. We have some fennel in there, which is sort of a cool, refreshing note. If you think of fennel or anise as anything that's like that black licorice flavor, for me, it's always that sort of cool breath of fresh air in, like that. We get coming to play with that. We also have some cassia bark in there, which is really what we know as cinnamon. So that has a little bit of warming nature to it as well. We've got some Granny Smith apples from an orchard just north of Toronto here that we get to throw in there. For anyone who's ever used apples in cooking or baking, what they're great for is carrying flavors, and we get to have that in here as well. So we do get a little bit more depth of flavor after we've tasted it. But what we're going to do now is we're actually going to add some ice in. And as we add some ice in, it's actually going to open this gin up. And it's going to open it up in a couple of different ways. One, it's going to crash the temperature right down. So it's going to release different oils and different flavors. And two, there's going to be a slight dilution as well. And that's going to, similar to adding, a few drops of distilled water into a single malt scotch, that sort of light dilution is going to open and release in our gin as well. So I'm going to throw in some some ice. Sometimes people ask me, how much ice do you really want to put in? I always go with more. If you're the sort of person who, maybe you nurse a drink for a while and you don't want all of that dilution, maybe start with half the amount of ice and then 10 minutes from now add in a little bit more. But I like to load it all up. I guess I don't really have a problem with the letting all of the ice melt sort of issue. So I will throw in a bunch of ice there. I'm going to swirl it around in my glass, getting this nice and cold. I can feel it on the outside of my glass getting nice and cold. And we're going to do another sip of that just to see how a little bit of ice introduced into the spirit can change it and open it up. So we'll do another quick little sip. And it kind of mutes some of those higher notes a little bit, some of that the citrus or the sweetness, and it kind of brings out a little bit more depth of flavor. We're finding a little bit more of that fennel coming through. We also use a wild forage Canadian botanical called sweet fern. We work with Indigenous communities in northern Quebec to get our sweet fern, and that has a little bit of sweetness that's coming into play in there as well. But it does change sort of the botanicals that are being released, usually a little bit more middle or deeper flavors. And so we get that coming into play a little bit. It also changes the viscosity. It sits a little bit heavier on the tongue. It's almost like a creamier mouthfeel after we've added just a little bit of ice in there as well. So now we've tried it neat. We've tried it opened up with a little bit of ice. And now what we're going to do is we're going to add in some mix. And of course, a classic pairing of gin and tonic. Now this Fentimans Connoisseurs tonic. Fentimans is out of the UK, and the Connoisseurs is very much their traditional tonic water. And so you guys might need a bottle opener for this one. But pretty much the point of adding tonic is oftentimes where I find people mess up their gin and tonics as much as someone can mess up a G&T. And if you know that you love tonic water, by all means, feel free to just dump that whole thing in there. But what I usually like to recommend is a bit of a step it up method, which is, throw in half of your tonic water, sip, splash, sip, splash, sip, and build up the amount of tonic that you're adding in there. And this, I like to recommend this for a few reasons. One, oftentimes people find that they actually like less tonic than they thought they did. They like having the spirit showcased a little bit more. Two, it's reduction in sugar, especially if you might be having one or two or 3 or 4 of these throughout the evening. The less sugar, the better, of course. It's going to help that hangover the next day. And really, what I'd like to say is, you can always add more tonic in. That is certainly doable. But I guess it is just as easy to add more gin in. But trust me, that is a slippery slope if you're just topping up your G&T with the spirit. It's so much easier to regulate the tonic water that's going in. So I'm going to throw about half of my tonic in, and oftentimes I'll get the question, what's the right amount of tonic? I think Fever Tree's tagline is, if 3/4 of your drink is mixer, make it the best mixer. I myself am much more of a 1-to-1 gin to tonic ratio kind of guy. I think by virtue of just having a pretty high rate of exposure to some pretty good gin, but it will completely change. There are hot summer days where I want a refreshing drink, and there are long work days where I would rather a stiff gin and tonic. So it is entirely up to you, and it's easier to sort of start with less tonic and add more. I'll also recommend having a sip of the tonic water on its own, getting a sense of what the botanicals that are coming to play out of that tonic too. So I'll try a little bit of a sip of the tonic on its own. And with that Connoisseur's tonic, we're dealing with a classic flavor profile. It'll be a little bit dry on the finish. You might find it's almost a little bit tangy in there too. There are some citrus components in there. So we've got this guy all mixed up. So we're going to swirl it around, and we will try a little sip of this classic pairing. And that is a perfectly delicious traditional gin and tonic pairing. And of course, no G&T is going to be complete without a little bit of garnish. And so we've got some dehydrated lime slices that can just go right on in there. I actually prefer having the dehydrated slices. If you are someone who loves lime, and you can absolutely squeeze a fresh lime in there. But I like having sort of a hint of the flavor from the garnish. Again, nothing that's going to overpower the spirit, but almost give a nod to it. And so anytime with your garnish that you can pull it back to the spirit itself, that's a win. So I mentioned the 2 citrus botanicals in this gin are going to be lime and grapefruit peel. So being able to garnish it with a lime is a way of calling it back to that original spirit. And so this is going to be our sort of first pairing. And so cheers everyone who has patiently waited through this meeting to be able to cheers me with the G&T. Cheers, you guys. And I'll give you guys, while we have a gin and tonic, before I kind of guide you through that second pairing. And by all means, don't feel obligated to mix the second one right away. You can absolutely take your time through the course of the evening. But we'll talk about how the gin and tonic sort of came to be. And so gin was developed actually originally in the 1500s. It was developed by the Dutch. Everyone assumes it was the Brits, and they absolutely had their part to play in increasing the notoriety of gin, but it originated with the Dutch, who had actually created it as a medicinal alcohol. It was the original version of it was Genever, which is the Dutch word for juniper. And so juniper was the one botanical that they would use in this alcohol. And like I mentioned, for medicinal purposes, juniper is an anti-inflammatory, it's an anti-arthritic, and it's actually still used today, even here in Indigenous communities in Canada, for that very reason. So they developed this alcohol to be an anti-inflammatory and anti-arthritic. Doesn't take too long until they're like, hey, this stuff tastes pretty good, and it is consumed socially as well. And then how tonic sort of came onto the scene was actually the Brits in the 1600s. They're traveling all around the world. They're in the spice routes and the trade routes, and their navy is encountering diseases that they've never had to deal with before. And the number one disease was malaria. And so the British Navy goes to the locals in India, and they're like, what do you guys do to help fight the malaria? And the locals take the Navy over to this tree, and they point to the tree and they say, this is our fever tree. And so their fever tree is the cinchona tree, the bark of which has quinine in it, which is an active anti-malarial. And so the Brits take the bark off of this tree, and from that they create a health tonic. And the health tonic was intended so that every member of the Navy would get their daily ration of this health tonic in order to help combat malaria. Now, this early version of tonic would not have been filtered, it would not have been sweetened, would not have been carbonated. It was a bark water. And so what they would find is, more often than not, this bark water, goes overboard instead of actually being consumed by the members of the Navy and for its rightful purpose. And so in an effort to increase morale and keep people healthy, the British Navy starts to issue a daily ration of gin, with the idea that the gin is supposed to be added into that health tonic or tonic water in order to make it really, really palatable, so that people were more likely to consume their health tonic or tonic water as we know it now. So that's going to be gin, which was an anti-arthritic and anti-inflammatory. We then are adding to it. Everyone assumes that tonic was developed to add to gin, but they actually both developed independently and then sort of came together. And so the tonic is, of course, an anti-malarial. And then, of course, no gin and tonic is complete without a citrus garnish. And the citrus garnish, usually a lemon or a lime back in the day, would help to fight the second biggest disease that the Navy needed to worry about, which was scurvy. So in three components of a gin and tonic, all three of which had medicinal backgrounds. We have worked very, very hard to get our alcohol licenses. I'm not trying to lose our liquor license by any stretch. I refuse to say that a gin and tonic is a healthy drink. However, historically speaking, that is how we actually ended up with the gin and tonic. You may even see some traditional tonic waters are actually called Indian tonic water, and that's referring to the fact that tonic water was developed in India with the help of those Indian locals who were helping the British Navy. And so that is how we ended up with a gin and tonic all these years later. So that is our classic gin and tonic pairing. I'm sure you guys still have some left in the glass. Maybe some of you guys are a little a step or two beyond me. I am speaking, so I'm a little bit slower to knock the drink back, but I will guide you guys really quickly through our second pairing of the evening. And so this is going to be our spice gin, this little red guy here, and we're going to pair that one with our Valencian orange tonic water. Now, in Canada, we have London dry style gins. We have even some citrus gins, some different flavored gins. I don't think we do nearly enough spice gins. So earlier I was talking about how with the right botanicals, you can sort of create a gin that tastes like anything. This is a perfect example of how we can get a little bit creative. So we're going to crack this guy open. And again, you measure with your heart how much you would like to consume this evening. There is no rush. It is shelf stable. You can enjoy it tomorrow as well. But we've thrown that in here, and I did mention it before, but the three big botanicals in this one are going to be cardamom, clove, and cassia bark, or what we know as cinnamon. And so the big three C's is really how we remember those ones. And so this warming gin goes great in a Negroni. It's awesome getting it nice and cold for a martini. If you guys like Caesars and you're making it with a vodka, you may as well make it with a vodka that's been redistilled with a bunch of spices. So other botanicals that are in this spice gin, we've got ginger root, we have Szechuan peppers, just a little bit, nothing too crazy because they can be a little bit numbing. But my dad and brother had just got back from a trip to China when we were doing recipe development on this, and they were like, Szechuan peppers, we have to have Szechuan peppers. So there are some Szechuans in there as well. We also use some Miracagale. It's a Canadian wild forage botanical, sort of a peppery kind of flavor. And the one citrus botanical that we throw in this spice gin is actually citrus. It's actually orange peel, and that orange peel has a little bit more sweetness than a lot of the other citrus, and so that sweetness helps to kind of battle against the depth of flavor that those other botanicals are, and that is also why we're going to pair it with our Valencian orange tonic water. So going to do a little bit of a nosing off this guy, similar to how we did with our original gin, just off the bat. And for me, it's the cardamom and the clove that jump right to the top of that. Very, again, warming. We often find that seasonally, as soon as it starts to get cold out, people sort of gravitate away from our citrus gin and they kind of come closer to the spice gin season. So I'll throw this in a mulled apple cider or something as well. Again, awesome depth of flavor. So we'll try a little bit of a sip now. Really having, again, the cardamom and clove are big ones, but getting a little bit more of that ginger and having some of the warmth coming from that cassia or the cinnamon bark coming in through there as well. I'm going to add in some ice on this one. And what happens when we add in ice on this, because it's so many deep, deep flavors, when we add ice into this one, it's really going to sort of elevate it. This gin, I actually call this my sipping gin, and I just pour it over ice, and I am good to go. A lot of people don't usually view gin as a sipping spirit, but if it's the right gin, then absolutely you can. So got it getting nice and cold in here. Going to give that a little bit of a swirl. And we'll try another sip and see how just the ice is going to open that up. I get a little bit more black peppercorn flavor coming through. That's going to be our Canadian Miracagale. I also get some ginger root coming through. And so if you wanted to throw this with a ginger beer, maybe a squeeze of lime juice or some fresh mint, and have a gin mule in place of your Moscow mule, this is the gin for that as well. It's a perfect combination for that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in some of our Valencian orange tonic water. Now this is obviously more of a flavored tonic water than the classic traditional one that we were dealing with. And so like with that first one, start with a little bit. You can always add more. And like with the first one, it's good to get a sense of what the actual tonic water brings on its own as well. So we'll try a little bit of a sip of that. Excellent, refreshing. And now we're going to throw that in. Again, I'm just going to do about half of mine. And that's pretty much to that level there. And that's where I will start. You can always add more tonic. So we'll give that a little bit of a swirl. And then, of course, to be able to garnish it with something that's actually in there, we are going to throw in a couple of dehydrated blood orange slices. Now, it is just regular orange that we use in the peel for this one, but we wanted to kind of elevate the experience a little bit. And so we get fancy little blood oranges because they look so beautiful when we get to dehydrate them. We do all of our dehydrating here on site as well. So we'll throw those in. And the thing I love about the dehydrated garnish is you get to reuse it. More often than not, when I'm using fresh garnish, I'll dump everything when I'm done and I'll make a fresh G&T. But the longer these guys soak, the more it's going to sort of exchange by flavor going out and coming back in to the garnish as well. So you can kind of continue to use them throughout the course of the evening. So we are all paired up with our second gin and tonic of the evening, whether you have this one in front of you or the original one that we had paired up, or maybe you've finished them both or haven't even started any of them. Cheers to all of you guys. I will let you carry on with your evening. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of this. I hope you guys have a wonderful and safe rest of your night and your week. Cheers, you guys.
Thank you, Calvin. That was very insightful and very amazing. I don't drink, so unfortunately, I could not use any of those tips, but I'm sure people really enjoyed them. Hello, everyone. My name is Anga Gupta, and I am one of the members of the 25th Anniversary Committee and Manager Mortgage Execution in Scotiabank's Real Estate Banking Group. We would now like to invite everyone to join our informal networking night on the Wonder Me app. The link has been provided by Farah in the chat. If you please click on it and follow the instructions, you can then turn off your camera and mute your mic in Zoom before entering Wonder Me. Once you're connected, please leave Zoom. I will be around in Zoom to assist anyone having any sort of technical difficulties. We wish you all a very happy holidays and thank you for being part of Toronto Crew's 25th anniversary celebration.
Thank you, Anga.
Fantastic event. I'll see you guys on the other side.
Yeah, please head on over and once
Bye.
you're in there, then you can leave here.